we started looking at times for davening, the Jewish day, the way that it's split up. So just as a quick recap for everybody, the most important thing over here is something called Sha'ot Zmaniyot. Sha'ot Zmaniyot is when you take the daylight hours and you divide it into 12. So in the summer you've got longer hours, and in the winter you've got shorter hours. But that's going to define it's going to define the day, right? So we need to know what time you're allowed to start davening in the morning, right? Till what time you're allowed to daven in the morning. Then you've got to worry about, when is midday? When can you start davening mincha? When can you stop davening mincha? Right? All of these things need to be defined, and they're going to be defined according to Sha'ot Zmaniyot, because the day is going to be, we very much are dependent upon the sun. So again, I mentioned yesterday, coming from England, being dependent on the sun is a little complicated because you don't actually get to see it. But there is definitely a tradition that's passed down from generation to generation that above the smog and the clouds, there is a sun there. I don't think there's no eyewitnesses to actually, who can actually testify to this, but. Whatever, we believe in these things, we really do. So yesterday we got up to, we spoke about, when the difference between dawn and sunup, right, which are two very important moments, and there's a disagreement amongst the authorities about when the day begins. According to some, it begins with the dawn. According to some, it begins with the sunup. That has a practical ramification with regards to up until when can you recite the Shema, up until when can you recite the Amidah for Shacharit, for the morning services. So it just depends. It's one section is shorter, one is longer. According to somebody called the Magen Avraham, it's going to, the cutoff time is going to be earlier than for those that follow the opinion of the Vilna Gaon and the Baal HaTanya. The basics are that Shema has to be recited within the first 3 hours of the day. Again, hours being Sha'ot Zmaniyot, so we're talking about halachic hours, and Shachris has to be recited within the first 4 hours of the day. And then the last thing we spoke about yesterday was Chatzah, when it's midday. Midday, of course, is not 12 o'clock. I mean, twice a year it is 12 o'clock, but in general it's not 12 o'clock. It's when it's the middle of the day. So right now, I think the middle of the day is sort of hovering around 1:45, and midday and midnight are going to be exactly the same time. So 1:45 in the afternoon is going to be midday. 1:45 at night is going to be midnight, and that's got a lot of bearing, because once we get to midday, we're now moving into the, when we can start davening mincha. Now I mentioned, the last thing I think we mentioned was that mincha is not davened from midday onwards, but rather we start a half an hour after midday. That's the first time that you can pray mincha. And that's because we're making sure that, just to make sure that we've gone past midday, because if you daven mincha before midday, then you haven't fulfilled your obligation. So, before we get involved in the nitty-gritty of mincha, we've got a few terms that we need to become conversant with. The first one is something called mincha gedola, which means the big mincha. Mincha gedola is the first moment in the afternoon that you can pray mincha. We'll talk about it, a little bit. Mincha gedola, right? Big mincha. Again, when is that? So we're talking about 6.5 hours Sha'ot Zmaniyot from the beginning of the day. Like I mentioned, right now, I think we're talking the first moment that you can start davening mincha here in Yerushalayim is around 1:14. Maybe today it's 1:15. I don't know. Don't hold me down to individual minutes, but it's around that time of the day. There is so after mincha gedola, obviously, if anybody here speaks Hebrew, so you know that the word gedola means big, right? So if you've got a mincha gedola, you have to have a mincha ketana as well. Otherwise, you don't have anything to balance it against, right? Mincha ketana is a small mincha. When is a small mincha? That's 9.5 hours into the day. Right now, what's the difference? Mincha gedola, big mincha, is the first moment that you can pray the afternoon service. That means that the afternoon has now begun. Right? Mincha itself is actually, the mincha offering was offered up towards the end of the day, right, in the temple. So there is an opinion that it's better to daven mincha later on in the afternoon, towards the end of the afternoon, rather than at the beginning of the afternoon. And that's called from mincha ketana onwards. So from 9.5 hours into the day, right? From then on is mincha ketana.
So why don't we make mincha gedol later on and the mincha ketana at the beginning?
I don't know why. I don't know why one is called mincha gedol and the other one's called mincha ketana. I don't know.
The time that starts earlier would last for longer. So the there's the big afternoon,
possibly.
there's the little afternoon.
It's possible, right? It might also have something to do with the with the sun, right? The sun is at its zenith at mincha gedola time, right? Midday.
No,
that's when it's at its
opinion
fittest.
that somebody has an opinion that you should say it later in the afternoon, the mincha.
Yeah.
So I'm saying why.
Why is that not called mincha gedola?
Right.
I don't know. It could be because of what you're saying, that it's just a definition. You've got more time for mincha gedola for the afternoon. Could be to do with the size of the sun, right? The position of the sun, that it's at its highest, at its most powerful when it's in the middle of the day. I don't know. I think it's pretty much guaranteed that if it was the other way around, somebody would have asked the question, but why is that mincha ketana? Why is that one mincha gedola? We're Jewish, right? So that's the way we do things. But in all events, we've got mincha gedola, mincha ketana. Which one should you follow? So again, there are opinions which say that it's better to pray mincha later on in the afternoon. You'll find minyanim for mincha all over the place at all times of the day. So if you walk up the road to the to the shtibelech up the road, you'll find from 1:15 onwards, one after the other, until the end of the day, they're going to be minyanim over there. Which is the one that you should be following? I don't just daven mincha. That's what I say, right? Davening earlier, davening later. Some people, that the Chazon Ish, who was considered to be one of the greatest halachic authorities from 2 generations ago, lived over here in Bnei Brak. He was very makpid, very very careful to daven mincha gedola every single day. Right, at 1:15, whenever he could daven, that's when they davened. What's the best thing to do? Like I said, the best thing is to daven mincha, right, Ben?
Right.
Right, when? As long as it's in the afternoon, it doesn't matter, right? Good, okay. So we've got mincha gedola, we've got mincha ketana. We've also got something called plaga mincha. Now, what is plaga mincha? Plaga mincha doesn't have a lot of bearing for us. It doesn't have a lot of practical application for us during the week. It does have practical application with regards to Erev Shabbos, right? So let's have a look and see what we've got. Plaga mincha is half of the way between mincha ketana and sunset. Okay? Well, we're talking about 10 3/4 hours into the day. You've got two and 1/4 hours left to finish up the day, right? Shkia is sunset. So we're going, well, that's what plaga mincha is all about. Now, what is plaga mincha? So plaga mincha is, so what did I just say? One and a quarter.
10
What?
10 and 3/4. You said 10 and 3/4.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's 1 1/4 hours before sunset. I said 2, no?
Yeah.
Right.
You're just saying, yeah, because I said that I said 2.
No, you said 2.
Ben?
I'm telling you said 2.
Okay. It was a mistake. Ben, don't listen. It was a mistake. 1 1/4 hours before sunset. That is plaga mincha. What is the big deal about plaga mincha? Plaga mincha is, according to some opinions, is considered to be already the end of the day and moving into the beginning of the next day, and that means that you can now bring in, it's the earliest time that you can bring Shabbos in. So in the winter, we don't do that, but in the summer, there are many, many communities in the summer that bring Shabbos in early because it gets very dark. It gets dark very late, right? So for example, when I was growing up in England, it could get dark at 9:30 at night, 10 o'clock at night it could be dark. And nobody wanted to bring Shabbos in that late because, by the time you come home, and it's getting very, very late. And so subsequently, it's okay to bring in Shabbos earlier than darkness, and before it gets dark. From when can you bring in Shabbos? From this thing called plaga mincha. Right, and that's why it's got a lot of practical ramifications for many, many communities around the world in the summer months. In England, for example, over here in Israel, most communities tend to keep Shabbos, they tend to bring in Shabbos at the regular time. There are communities that bring it in a little bit earlier than that, but I know, for example, when I was growing up in England, everybody brought in Shabbos early. And it was brought in.
The children.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so you know what? It's nice to blame it on the children. It really is, but it's not. It's not just the children. Nobody really wants to be coming home at 11 o'clock at night and then making kiddush and having to start the Shabbos meal and everything. It's very late. It really is. My mother told over that when she was a child growing up, so they moved to Scotland. Because of the Blitz, because of the Second World War, because of the bombings in London. So they moved to Scotland, to the east coast of Scotland, which is very far north, and the whole country was on double summertime, right? In order to have as much daylight as possible, because the bombing raids were less during the day than they were during the night, and my mother said that Shabbos went out at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's when it ended. And she said that her father, my grandfather, would make Havdalah on Sunday morning because nobody was going to stay up until 1:30 at night in order to make Havdalah. So they just made it in the morning when everybody woke up. What's that got to do with anything? Nothing, actually, nothing at all. But I just thought I would throw it in order to try to garner some kind of enthusiasm and interest, but it didn't seem to work.
So
You look like you haven't taken your medication. That's
Why is
Yeah.
it out at 1 in the morning?
what?
What? Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna ask. So is it with Plaga Mincha? Are you still gonna say Mincha before then, or
Yeah, as far as you're concerned, as far as we're all concerned, you can say Mincha from Mincha Gedola until sunset.
Okay.
Right? Is it better to say it before Plaga Mincha? Not necessarily.
Okay.
Right? The only thing that you've got to be careful with, again, if you're bringing Shabbos early, so then there are various laws about what time Mincha should be recited before you start reciting Kabbalat Shabbat, just to make sure that everything is being done in the right time frame. But that's just it's a technical thing.
So it was far north, which meant that the sunlight was for longer during the day.
It just meant the days were very long in the summer. Days were very long. We spoke about that right yesterday. That in Norway is the first part of Norway is the first northernmost part of Europe where they have it's called the land of the midnight sun, right? Where the sun doesn't actually set behind the horizon. It does set, but it rises again before it dips behind the horizon. And I tell you that my parents went to see it, and they said it was surreal. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's a great big ball of sun in the
People live
sky.
there year round.
Yeah.
St. Petersburg's like that too. It's pretty cool.
St.
I mean-
Petersburg?
Yeah,
In Russia?
Yeah, it's called they call it Bieli Noche, White Nights, is the period of time when the sun doesn't set.
Right.
And people will sleep through the day because it's super hot, and then go out at night when everything's open.
Cool.
No, hot.
Yeah,
That's what he just said.
That's what I said. Pay attention, Rabbi. Cool is that? What?
Okay, next thing along after Plaga Mincha is something called Shkia. Now, what is Shkia? Shkia is sunset.
So what's Shkoya then? When people say
Shkoyach. Shkoyach is well done, or congratulations, or here. Right? If
English.
if they were if English Parliament was comprised of Jews, instead of saying here, they would say Shkoyach. That's probably one of the reasons why it's not full of Jews, and so they can carry on saying here because that's much more expressive. Shkoyach is one of those. It's a combination of Yashar Koach, which means straight and strong. Right? If you say something good, that was like, well, that was great. So. Yashar Koach, right? So we say Shkoyach because it just sort of like gets blended into one unidentifiable, mass of something.
It's not Yiddish.
I mean, it might have a Yiddish inflection to it, but it's
Hebrew.
Hebrew.
Like Yontif, which is like 2 Hebrew words.
Right, Yom Tov becomes Yontuf. All kinds of things.
Kriya Shema.
Yeah, so the emphasis is like this, but Kriya Shema, even though they call it Krishma, right? They really shouldn't, because Kriya Shema is definitely one of the prayers that we're supposed to be reciting very, very carefully. If you look inside of the city, you'll see many Sidurim have got lines in between various words, because you've got to be very careful with your pronunciation. So if you've got one word that finishes with a pei and another word that begins with a pei, you'll find there'll be a line just to let you know that you've got to finish that word before you start pronouncing the next word. It's kind of ironic, yeah, that they call it Krishma and they turn it into one word, which is really not what they're supposed to be doing at all. Oh, maybe that's why they're doing it. Ah, okay, maybe. Who knows? Who was probably a nice Jewish boy, I would imagine.
Is Yashar spelled with an aleph?
Sorry?
Yashar?
Yashar, Ken. Yud, Shin, Reish.
Okay.
Did you just ask if it's spelled with an aleph?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I said yes. Yud, Shin, Reish. I'm not functioning today. I'm really not.
Okay.
The answer is no. No. Anyway.
I always thought it's yishkoach, like there is power.
Ah, yishkach. Yeah. I listen. You know, you can get away with anything, right? With all of these things. It's quite interesting listening to people who are sort of telling things over that they've heard from other people that they're not quite sure what they're saying, and they say all kinds of weird and wonderful things that don't make an awful lot of sense. But the truth of the matter is, what's rather depressing is that even people, when they do know what they're saying, say weird and wonderful things that don't make any sense. So maybe it's better that it sounds cute. Whatever.
Baruch to you.
Huh?
And after the Shkoyach, Baruch to you.
Oh, yeah. Chazak v'baruch, right, which is what the Tzfadim say, which is an easier thing to pronounce because it's kind of difficult to mangle that into one word, right? Chazak. In general, Tzfadim are much more careful about the way they pronounce their words and certainly their letters. That's for sure. Differences between aleph and ayins and chetz and chafs and chetz and whatever. But that's a different class. Maybe at some point we can talk about the origins of different pronunciations. But that's not for now. Right now we are holding by Shkia. What is Shkia? Shkia is sunset.
When the stars come out?
No, sunset is prior to that. We're moving into the twilight zone, right? Which means that now this is a period of time which we touched on this yesterday, I think. It's a very, very non-defined period of time. What does it belong to? Does twilight belong to the day that's just finishing? Or does it belong to the new day which is about to begin with the night? And Chazal, the sages themselves, are a little uncertain as to what it is. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, which says that on the Ben Hashmashot, at twilight, God created 10 things that were not part of they weren't part of the basic creation of the world. They were additional bits of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that God created after the end of the creation. And it's this period of time, Ben Hashmashot, which really means between the two suns. So we're talking about between the sun and the moon, which is not 100% defined. You should endeavor to have prayed mincha before sunset. Now, sunset nowadays, what are we looking at? It's probably around 7:15, give or take, right? Which means that you need to finish davening mincha by sunset. Shkia, right?
Same thing, right?
Same thing. And if you haven't, you do have a little bit of a buffer period. According to many authorities, within the first 13 minutes of the Shkia of after sunset, you can still pray mincha, but you're doing it b'di avad, right? B'di eved, which means it's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to pray mincha before the sun sets and not after the sun sets. How long is Shkia? Well, it depends where you live. Right? In some places, Shkia is shorter. In some places, it's longer. It really depends where you're situated in something or other to the equator. I can't remember the word that I was trying to use. In relation to the equator. Thank you. I'm not very good on relations, so especially my wife's. But now I've lost my train of thought again. But of course I can. Are you kidding? My parents used to have a sign up in their house which said, "Insanity is hereditary. You get it from your children."
That's mean.
It's kind of true.
No, it's completely true. Not kind of, completely. Anyway, depending on where you live, depends on how long Shkia is. Over here in Israel, Shkia is 18 minutes long. which means the time difference between the sun setting and nightfall is 18 minutes. In other countries, it's going to be much longer than that.
Is that because the 18 minutes, is that the one right after Rick mentioned? We still have 18 minutes?
Lichtbench, lighting Shabbos candles is supposed to be done 18 minutes before sunset.
Before.
Right, and we'll talk about that as well in Mitzvah Hashem when we get to it. But here in Israel, here in Jerusalem, we light even earlier than that. Many communities, even though 18 minutes is the crossover between the end of the day and the beginning of the night, for sure, many communities wait for 20 minutes. There are some places which wait for 30 minutes, and there is also something called Rabbeinu Tam, which is an even longer period of time. Again, just depending on which community you belong to, depends on what kind of time they're going to be, what kind of time they're going to be praying in.
So
Does
that mean that Shabbos candles are lit before Shabbos actually starts?
Yeah. Well, what's the problem? Shabbos candles, once you've lit your Shabbos candles, the Shabbos comes in, if you're a woman. Anyway, for women, Shabbos comes in when they light the Shabbos candles, right? The problem is like this. Let's say Shabbos comes in, for example, let's say it gets dark. I'm just keeping round figures, but let's say it gets dark at 8 o'clock, right? Exactly 8 o'clock. No, hold on a second. Let's say the sun sets at 8 o'clock, right? That's when Shabbos comes in. Now, if you wait until the last moment and you light your Shabbos candles at 8 and 5 seconds, you've now transgressed the Shabbos, which is a problem, right? So,
For men, right?
for men, for women,
Okay.
Wait.
So for women, it starts when they light the candles.
Yeah, I'm
Except
saying-
they light it.
Oh,
after
so the thing here, the
which
thing
means
is-
they transgress.
thing is like this, right? Let's start again and let's do this again in a more orderly fashion, right? Shabbos comes in at sunset, right? If sunset is at 8 o'clock, for everybody at 8 o'clock it now becomes Shabbos. That's it. There's nothing you can do anymore. However, for women, when they light their Shabbos candles, even though they're lighting earlier, it now becomes Shabbos for them, right? Men don't have that particular stringency. Now, why do we light Shabbos candles earlier than sunset? For a very simple reason, that if you were to light Shabbos candles at sunset, if you were to overstep by even a few seconds, you're now doing something which is forbidden to do on Shabbos, which is kindling fire, right? So the Jewish world accepts upon itself to have candle lighting time 18 minutes before sunset, unless you live here in Jerusalem and in Petach Tikva, which I'll explain in a moment, and then they light Shabbos candles 38 minutes before sunset. They added an extra 20 minutes on because Jerusalem is the holiest city in the world, so they wanted to add an extra, period of time to bring in the holiness of Shabbat. What's that got to do with Petach Tikva? Not a lot, except that the original people that went to settle what became Petach Tikva were from Yerushalayim, and they took the Jerusalem custom together with them. That's why you'll find, interestingly enough, Petach Tikva is comprised of the old part of Petach Tikva, and then over the road there's enormous new parts that have been built. In the newer parts they don't keep the Jerusalem time, only in the old part of Petach Tikva they do. Yes?
What's with this whole 40-minute thing after you light candles? That you're able
What's
to still,
with
like,
it?
So when, like every other weekend I go to Beis Shemesh for Shabbos with my sister, and she lives in Beis Shemesh. She lives with this kind of like foster family that she stayed with during her time in the army or whatever it was. In this house, they told me that they have this like 40 minutes after they light candles to finish up everything that they need to do for Shabbos.
Okay, so again, it's got a lot to do with whether you're male or whether you're female. If you are a man, then Shabbos candle lighting does not have an enormous repercussion on you.
Is it because it's a mitzvah primarily given to the women?
It's a mitzvah which women took upon themselves to take on themselves. But it's interesting that even if a man lights Shabbos candles, right, which does happen from time to time, that it doesn't have the same effect that it has on women. When women light Shabbos candles, they bring in Shabbos. right? So if a woman lights the Shabbos candles, even if she's lighting them here in Yerushalayim 40 minutes before sunset, nevertheless, right? If she lights the Shabbos candles, it's now Shabbos, and she can't do anything else that's going to prepare for Shabbos if it's going to involve Shabbos transgressions, right? So for example, she can't put on the lights, she can't cook anything else, right? What she can do though, without any problems whatsoever, is that she can turn to her husband, of course, if they're talking to each other, right? Which probably also doesn't happen very often. She can turn to her husband and say, oh, I forgot to put the lights on, in the bathroom, can you go and switch the light on? Which is not something, once Shabbos comes in, that's not something you can normally do, right? But because they were stringent upon themselves, so there's a little bit of allowances over here. For a man, after the Shabbos candles have been lit, he can still go around doing things that need to be done, right? So he can put on the lights, and he can sort out the time switches, and he can, deal with the food and plug in things and all of that kind of stuff. There's no problems whatsoever.
When's the earliest that she can light candles?
Plaga mincha, right? So from with 1.25 hours before sunset, she can already light Shabbos
So
candles.
there's a lot to do for Shabbos. She could threaten to light the candles if he doesn't. Right, you
Wow.
control yourself, I'll light the candles.
You've obviously had an exposure to healthy, nourishing relationships by the sound of things. Yes, she could. she definitely could. She could, but maybe she shouldn't. Maybe she shouldn't. But
Use Shabbos as a bargaining.
Yeah, doesn't seem the spirit.
No.
Well, what's interesting is that there are families. I know a particular family where they like to bring in Shabbos early, right? Which means that everything is taken care of and everything has been prepared, and then they bring in Shabbos early every single week. They'll light Shabbos candles, and it becomes Shabbos, and everything is nice and calm over there. Most families that I know, it's not quite like that. Most families that I know, the reason that things calm down is because Shabbos comes in and that's it. There's nothing more you can do, which is one of the beauties of the Shabbos candle lighting ceremony, is that you know that you've made it, regardless of whether everything is ready or not. That's it. There's nothing more that you can do, which is, it's important. Yeah, with some yes.
I was going to say, I asked somebody once, there is an obligation for a man to light candles in certain circumstances, and why it's not calling in Shabbos at the same time. And it was explained to me that it was the sequence, because you're lighting the match, you're igniting, you're creating a flame first, and you're holding it as you say the bracha, before you actually light the candle.
Yeah.
That it spares you from having to call Shabbos in until, Kabbalah Shabbos.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we spoke about, if my memory serves me correct, a while back we spoke about the halachas of lighting candles and bringing in Shabbos, but there is a fundamental difference between men and women with regards to lighting candles, and that is that women, once they've made the bracha over the candles, it's now Shabbat, come what may, even if they haven't lit the candles yet. Right now, you understand, I hope, if you're familiar with brachas, you know that you normally make a bracha before you do the action, right? So if you want to eat an apple, you make the Bori Priya 8, and then you take a bite out of the apple. Women, when it comes to lighting candles, don't do that. They light the candles first, and then they make the bracha afterwards, as opposed to men who make the bracha and then light the candles, which is a normal sequence of events. That's the way it's supposed to be, right? And the reason for that is that the minute women make the bracha of Ladlik Ner Shel Shabbat, of lighting the Shabbos candles, they've now brought in Shabbos, and if they haven't lit the candles yet, they're stuck.
But the man hasn't brought in Shabbos.
The man hasn't brought in Shabbos yet, so he could do it in the regular sequence. That's just something to keep in mind, although perhaps not. Okay. Anyway, that's Shkia. Shkia is sunset. Lighting Shabbos candles. Thank you. Lighting Shabbos candles is something that is done before Shkia. The good news is that even though Shabbos, if you take a look at the calendar, again, if you're looking at a calendar that's outside of Yerushalayim, it will give you Shabbos lighting times 18 minutes before sunset. If you're looking at a calendar from Yerushalayim, it will have candle lighting times at 38 minutes before sunset. The good news is that if you light the candles after the time that it says on the calendar, you haven't transgressed anything, because all of this is a buffer period to make sure that we're not going to transgress, right? So again, if sunset is at 8 o'clock and you were supposed to have lit the candles at 18 minutes to 8 and you didn't get around to lighting them until 10 to 8, that's okay. You haven't transgressed anything, and it's all right to be able to do that, even though obviously the best thing to do is to follow the times that have been given, right? Rather than rely on getting it done before the very last moment.
Or listen for the music. 5 minutes.
Right, here you've got in different from neighborhoods. It's very nice, you know. They've got sirens and they've got music, and you know, it's very nice. It really is. It's going back to a time, you know. The Gemara says that when Shabbos was coming in, they would send people around to blow trumpets, right, to let people know that it was Shabbos, and they sent them around at different times in order to close. First of all, earlier on, in order to close their shops. And then afterwards, in order to let you know that it was Shabbos was coming, you have to light your candles. And in the old Yishuv, which is going back, you know, about 100 years to the old Jerusalem, so they also sent people around to blow trumpets to let people know that it was getting close to Shabbos, and they have to close up their shops, and they have to go home, and they have to get ready for Shabbos. It's a very beautiful idea, it really is. Something which, you know, I know that when I go to Chutz La'aretz, when I leave Israel, and I'm gone over a Shabbos, it's something which is missing. Right? Most communities outside of Israel don't have some kind of a Shabbos system to let you know. Some communities do. Right? My wife has cousins who live in New York, and they have a siren for Shabbos over there. They live in a very Jewish neighborhood. But nevertheless, you know, most places they don't have these things.
Like a siren, like a bomb warning?
Well, yes, interesting. Yeah.
It's like really nice, but you're talking about sirens.
Yeah, so the siren that's used for the bomb warnings has got a different. It's a different sound.
Stronger, right?
It's not stronger. It goes up and down.
Like a bell.
The siren for Shabbos is just a straight, you know, a straight line. It is true, interestingly enough, I remember that in the Gulf War, that they stopped sounding the sirens on Erev Shabbos because they didn't want people to get scared and to make mistakes and imagine that there was some kind of an attack, because they are similar to each other. I mean, it's the same, coming out of the same. It's the same siren, the same the same speakers and everything, right? So yeah. It's actually what they use for Shabbos is the all clear.
Like a shofar or something different.
Yeah, that's why the emphasis. That's why many different communities over here in Israel now they have a music system, which is not. It's nice. It's great. It's really nice. You know, Erev Shabbos, all of a sudden you start hearing music being blared out all over the place. It's normally Shabbos related music, and you know that it's your candle lighting time, right? Or sometimes they let you know. What do you have by you? You have two lots of music. So one that's 20 minutes before, and then how does it work? I don't know.
One is 5 minutes before candle lighting, and then no, there's just one. It starts early, so it prepares you to prepare for lighting the candles. I'm trying to think. No, I think it's just one. That's just one. It's like 5 minutes before.
Okay. I mean, I know that my mother-in-law lives in Bnei Brak, and over there they have one siren which is like 20 minutes before music, and then they have another one right before candle lighting. Just let people know. I think it's beautiful. It really is. And
it plays until.
Oh, it just keeps playing.
Stops, that's time.
That's it.
It plays until somebody gets out their shotgun and blows the speakers to pieces because. Oh, sorry, excuse me, I don't know what got into me. Anyway, that takes care of Shkia, which is sunset. The next thing along, of course, is something called Tzeit HaKochavim, which is when the stars come out. Right, now, Tzeit HaKochavim is when the stars come out, that's the earliest time that you can daven Ma'ariv. Right, so you may be familiar with the idea of 3 stars, and the Shabbos going out, and looking for the stars. when is that Tzeta Kochavim? So again, it's a little bit of a machloikis, a little bit of a disagreement. What kind of stars we're looking for? In general, we're looking for medium-sized stars, as opposed to small stars, as opposed to big stars. Right? The bigger the star is, the easier it is to see. The smaller it is, the harder it is to see. Which means that the idea
You see
of
the big stars first.
yeah.
So you have to wait till all the big stars come out, and then you start counting once the medium stars come out. First 3 medium stars.
It all happens pretty much at the same time, and we're talking about night's fallen, right? And we're just what you can see in the sky. It's a very small difference between the two, right? Some of the bigger stars, of course, you can begin to see just before night falls, but the rest, they all come out pretty much at the same time. We're not talking about sitting there. So in England you'd be sitting there 5 hours later trying to look for a star, but that's a technical issue. It's not.
Light years.
Pardon?
Light years.
Light, you know what? Yeah, light years. What is Tzeta Kochavim as far as we're concerned with the stars coming out? What's our practical ramifications for nowadays? Well, first of all, to be able to daven Ma'ariv, but secondly, more importantly, right now, is to be able to count the Omer. Right, so we're in the middle of counting the Omer, and counting the Omer requires it to be dark outside. Why is this important? Because some people will daven Ma'ariv early. Right, so let's say, for example, a community that brings in Shabbos early, and it's now, when you get home, it's still, you've been to shul, you've davened Mincha, you've davened Kabbalat Shabbat, you've davened Ma'ariv, right? And you come home, it's still daylight outside, because it's the summertime, and it's late, and you sit down and you have your meal at home, you have your Shabbos Suda at home, and now when it gets dark, only now can you count the Omer, which means that even though you've davened Ma'ariv already, in shul they won't count the Omer yet, because they're not allowed to until it gets dark. It's something that you've got to remember to do. The other thing that you need to remember to do is to recite Kriyat Shema again, or Krishma, right? Again, right, from the beginning until the end, because even though you recited it within the Ma'ariv services, within evening services, nevertheless, it's not counted as having recited the Shema over Shach B'chol V'Kumecha, that when you get up and when you go to sleep. So you've got to be careful to recite the Shema as well.
When are you saying that is supposed to be done?
After the stars have come out, after it's nightfall.
Yeah.
So again, under normal circumstances, if you live in a community where you daven on Friday night, you daven after it's dark anyway. Yeah. You've got nothing to be concerned about. So you've recited your Shema in time, and you've recited the Omer on time as well, right? But for people that are bringing Shabbos in early, so that's something that they've got to take into account, because when they finish davening, it's still daylight outside, and it's something which really you've got to be careful about it.
So is that why in our scroll there's the Ma'ariv Shema and then there's bedtime Shema, which is like after?
Bedtime Shema is, again, the Ma'ariv Shema is there inside of the evening service, but the bedtime Shema is something we're supposed to recite when you go to sleep. Now, it's a pretty good moment if you have forgotten, if you davened Ma'ariv early, then that might be a good point to say your Kriyat Shema again, before you go to sleep. But you need to say the whole thing, all 3 paragraphs, not just the first paragraph. If you take a look inside of the Siddurim, most Siddurim, they have Kriyat Shema ala mitah, which is the Kriyat Shema you're supposed to say when you go to sleep, and they'll only have the first paragraph over there. Right, so that's okay, right? Because if you daven Ma'ariv after it got dark, so you've already fulfilled your obligation to recite the Shema at night, so it's fine. You're just saying it now as in context of, saying prayers before you go to sleep. But if you davened Ma'ariv early, then that would be a good moment to recite all 3 paragraphs of the Shema again, because it's a pretty good reminder, right? When the fasts end, so the fasts end when it gets dark outside. What are we talking about? So the emphasis is like this: when Shabbos goes out, we normally look for 3 medium-sized stars, which makes it a little bit later, right? When we're fasting, we normally are more lenient and we look for 3 small stars. And again, we're talking about a difference of maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. But when you're hungry and you've been fasting, every minute counts, right? Good. The only time that we're stringent with regards to the fasting is on Yom Kippur, right? When Yom Kippur ends, it ends at the same time that we would take out Shabbos, which is later, a little bit later on into the night. Okay, so basically we've come to the end of times for davening. So we're going to stop over here. Emir Hashem.